Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1990 action film Firebirds. Now, Firebirds is a film that I've always enjoyed. I have a lot of fun with this one. I've enjoyed it ever since I first saw it on VHS when I was a kid, and it's a film that I think is a little underrated. I don't think it's a classic. I don't think it's a great movie. I can understand why people aren't fans of it, but I don't get why it's considered to be like one of the worst Top Gun clones out there or one of the worst action movies of the 90s. Like, I don't really see that with this movie. I've seen a lot worse. Now, Firebirds is clearly intended to be a movie to cash in on the success of Top Gun, but that didn't really work out because critics hated this film and audiences were very lukewarm on it, and it just didn't do very well. It did not get the same kind of acclaim critically or from audience members. The movie is directed by David Green, who prior to this directed Phil Collins's acting debut in Buster. And there are some moments where the direction is fine, but I think a lot of that are scenes that are shot by the guys who shot the helicopter sequences, who had prior experience shooting helicopter stunt sequences in Airwolf, the TV show. So I think a lot of that is just due to those more experienced guys behind the camera. When it comes to the other sequences that don't involve stunts, don't involve pyrotechnics, or action of any kind, it looks like a TV movie. It definitely looks like the work of a director who's not really the most adept or the most established when it comes to action. This is a guy who directed a comedy, a heist comedy with Phil Collins prior to this, and like a couple TV movies. So that is something that definitely does show here. Now, there are some directors who are able to make up for that, but I don't think David Green is one of them. It just leads to the film looking like a cheaper production than it really is. Like, the film cost $22 million, but there's certain scenes where it looks like it was a made-for-cable movie or a direct-to-video film, which it ultimately was in a lot of different countries. But I would say the direction at best is just serviceable. It's adequate. It's definitely not Tony Scott. You're not getting really high quality, high flying direction here. It's just run of the mill, so kind of stuff. The script by Nick Thiel and Paul F. Edwards, based on a story by Dale Dye, Step Tyner, John K. Swenson, who are actual members of the military. The screenplay is definitely a mixed bag. It's a hit and miss kind of script. I think it does a decent enough job establishing characters. I think there's a lot with, for example, Brad Little. I think the script did a great job fleshing him out and making him feel like a very real and genuine person. And you definitely did connect with this guy. You liked him. You wanted him to find a way to get to Jake Preston, the hotshot pilot, and get him to be the best that he possibly can be. Speaking of Jake Preston, I think the script did a decent enough job with him as well, showing his cocky nature, but also showing how he's willing to change, and also showing his vulnerability, because there are moments in the film where he's not able to really finish the training. He's not able to do it because he's got something going on where he can't really use the computer data readout. It's messing with his eyes and his brain. He has like a disconnect between his brain and his eyes, and it's causing him to really fail when it comes to the training, and that leads to him learning a comical way to retrain his eyes. which I didn't mind. I know some people thought was just too ridiculous and too silly for words, and I get it. I mean, he's got a painting on his head and like a fucking what looks like a tube or something that's taped to his eye, but it was one of those things where it was handled in such a tongue-in-cheek way that I kind of got a kick out of it. But I could see why some people aren't really too big on that. But yeah, I think the script does a good job with those two characters, especially when it comes to the sequences where they share screen time with one another. So when these two characters are side by side, when you have the training sequences, or when they're in combat, I think the script definitely does shine because those two have some really good bits of connection with one another. The romance, though, between Billy and Jake, not really the best. Jake kind of comes across as a creepy stalker because he just can't seem to let his ex go. And it's just a really awkward setup for these two to get back together. There's a certain quirkiness to it that I find a little endearing and certainly unique when it comes to this kind of film, but that only goes so far because then you're just left with a lot of awkward moments with these two characters. And I don't think it really necessarily needed a love story anyway. Uh, One other thing I want to point out, I do think the bond between Brad and Rice, I thought those two had some nice chemistry, and I think the script did a good job giving them scenes to play off each other well, to the point where I definitely did feel for the character when he ultimately did die in combat. The conflict, though, is not really fleshed out the best. It's not handled properly. It doesn't have enough propellant behind it, so to speak. There's something about a drug war, but that doesn't really come across that strong, or it doesn't resonate as strongly. And then you have a lack of a real flesh and blood nemesis that really makes the action and the more intense sequences, especially in the climax, more thrilling and more exciting to watch, because you don't really have that same kind of connection that you get with other action films, where you have like a memorable villain, or you have some kind of conflict that really feels very visceral. And here, it's very flimsy, and this film is not alone with that. I mean, for instance, Top Gun had a very flimsy conflict. If you really think about it, it just involved Russian MiGs, and you didn't even get to know any of them. I don't even think you even saw the pilots' faces. So Top Gun did that as well, but Firebirds didn't have to do the same thing. It just came across a little lazy. I mean, they tried to do something a little bit different here by having this guy named Stoller, who's a hired gun for the drug uh, uh, kingpins, and they tried to make him the villain, but you barely get to know the guy. You don't. All you know is that he's a hired gun, and he's a really skilled helicopter pilot, and he flies a smaller, more agile helicopter in the Scorpion. That's really all that you know about this guy. He's just a hired gun. He's essentially just an assassin for hire. And, there's a little bit in the beginning where I think they try to connect things, where he's involved in a bit of a dogfight with Nicolas Cage early on in the movie, where he gets involved with Jake, and I think his initial partner gets shot down and killed by Stoller. But even that comes across as very fleeting and doesn't really have the impact that I think the writers really wanted it to. So yeah, the conflict is relatively weak, and that definitely is something that really could have used some improvement. But like I said, I don't think this script is a total misfire. I think it's got some decent enough things going on in terms of other sort of conflicts, especially with Jake Preston and his confidence, and the fact that he's got issues that he has to work out and he's not perfect, as well as the stuff going on with Brad and how he feels like he's being phased out and he's dealing with that because he's getting older. And when it comes to this kind of profession, once you get to a certain age, you are no longer going to be in combat because you're going to be considered a liability, or you're going to be considered to be someone who's not nearly as effective as a younger pilot. So I think the script did a good job with that drama, with his character, him facing that and dealing with that in his own way, and also the strife and the issues that that causes with his family, with his wife Janet. And it's also got some fun lines of dialogue, which I definitely got a kick out of and made me smirk. So it's a movie that the script is relatively generic. Seems like a lot of typical sort of stuff is thrown in there. It's a little lazy, and definitely something that really could have used a little bit more of a genuine or unique spark. But at the same time, I think the script is still decent. It's still okay. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. The performances by the cast. This is a film where the two leads really shine. I think Nicolas Cage and Tommy Lee Jones, I think they deliver good performances. Specifically Tommy Lee Jones, I honestly believe this is one of his best performances, at least when it comes to this kind of action movie. I really liked his take on Brad Little. He had a nice amount of charisma to him, but he was also very earnest and stern and believable as a older, more established training kind of figure, a guy who's there to train the young guns. Like, I do feel that Tommy Lee Jones really did embody that character really well, and you could tell that he had some fun with it as well. I don't think he was sleepwalking through his performance like other critics have said. I don't think Nicolas Cage was sleepwalking through his performance either. There are moments where he's totally unhinged and he's uncaged. He's doing the whole thing where he's in the simulator, playing the simulation games, and he's just kicking ass, and he's just like, I am the greatest! I am the greatest! Like, typical, just uncaged Nick Cage. And that's fun. That's fun to me. There are other moments where his performance is definitely a little off the rails, but that adds to the fun. So I don't really have a problem with Nicolas Cage's performance. I like his performance as Jake Preston. I thought he was believable as this hotshot helicopter pilot, and I thought he also had some good chemistry with Tommy Lee Jones. I don't think he had, honestly, any chemistry with Sean Young, which was definitely one of the film's more glaring flaws. And Sean Young, in particular, her performance is very flat. Definitely did seem like she didn't want to be here, didn't want to be in this movie. She definitely didn't have the same energy that Nick Cage and Tommy Lee Jones brought to their roles. I also want to mention Mary Ellen Trainor, who played Janet. Only had a few scenes, but she made the most of them. Peter Onorati, I liked him as Rice, the co-pilot of Brad, and Bert Rhine as Eric Stoller. Like, he wasn't like a memorable bad guy because he didn't really have barely any lines of dialogue, didn't really do a lot to really leave that much of an impression, but he was still menacing enough. Like, there was still a certain presence to him that I felt worked for what they were trying to do and for what Bert Rhine was given. Now, the film also features some cinematography by Tony Imi, and it's edited by 3 different people: Norman Buckley, Dennis M. O'Connor, and John Pohl. And there are some nice looking shots in this, specifically some of the shots of the helicopters flying in front of the sun. I also feel there's a few other sequences involving the helicopters during the training scenes or the combat that are really well put together, well framed. I feel the editing at times is really excellent, especially when it comes to the more exciting, thrilling scenes of helicopter combat, and even during the simulation sequences. I thought those sequences were really well cut and had a nice flow to them. The film also features a score by David Newman, and it's not one of his more memorable scores, but it's got some moments. It's got some moments where it definitely uh, provides a certain extra boost to certain sequences, especially when it comes to the action scenes. And speaking of the action scenes, I know they've gotten criticism for being slow, but I never really thought they were that slow. I've always liked the helicopter sequences in this film. I thought they were well shot, I thought they were well edited, and I thought they were actually pretty exciting to watch. They're different than anything involving a fighter jet, but that's because Apache helicopters can't fly as fast as a fighter jet. So there are certain limitations when it comes to movement, when it comes to the speed of what you can really showcase with helicopters in combat. And I still feel the way that those scenes were shot were really well done, and I thought they were exciting. I never really felt that they were boring or didn't really deliver when it comes to the thrills or the adrenaline, especially the sequences involving the Scorpion helicopter, the Stolers flying around. You definitely got the sense of speed with that one, especially in comparison with the Apaches. So with the Scorpion, which is sleeker and smaller and more agile, and then you have the Apaches, which have more guns, are a little bit heavier, not nearly as maneuverable. But that leads to a really crowd pleasing and pretty genuinely awesome finale when it comes to the end of the showdown between uh, Nick Cage and Stoller. So Preston and Stoller have this final showdown at the end of the movie, and Nick Cage's character does this 360 move with the helicopter and sneaks up behind him and then blows him away. And it's actually pretty gory too, because there's like a lot of blood squibs. The guy gets pumped full of lead and there's blood spraying everywhere, which I thought was kind of surprising for a PG-13. But yeah, I thought that was a really genuinely badass moment. And the film, it goes by at a pretty quick pace. It's only 80 something minutes. It's not like it's a film that overstays its welcome that much. Even has a good Phil Collins song at the end credits, which is kind of surprising when you think about it. That that there's a Phil Collins song at the end credits for this movie about Apache helicopters. Um, I think it's called Find a Way. Yeah, it's called Find a Way to My Heart by Phil Collins. So, which is a big hit song, but a lot of people don't really remember it from Firebirds. They remember it from the album that it's a part of, which was one of the bigger albums from that year. But I think that's probably in there because the director directed Buster, so maybe he decided to throw in some Phil Collins in there because that was part of his wheelhouse, or maybe Phil owed him a favor or something. I don't know, but it's just kind of an interesting sort of thing that this movie has Phil Collins songs in the soundtrack, and it doesn't really feel like a movie that would have Phil Collins involved in that capacity. But yeah, I honestly would recommend the film if you enjoy Top Gun. You like action films that involve uh, high flying stunts and stuff like that. I do recommend the movie, despite the fact that it's got a lot of bad reviews. I know a very close friend of mine does not like the movie at all, and that's fine. To each their own. But it's still one of those things where I would recommend you checking it out if you haven't seen it, because I think there's enough there that can really genuinely entertain you, especially when it comes to the stunts, when it comes to the helicopter sequences, and when it comes to the scenes involving Tommy Lee Jones and Nicolas Cage. Not necessarily the scenes involving Sean Young, but I just think that was a case of miscasting. I think a different actress should have been cast in that role because Sean Young just wasn't the right fit. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Firebirds. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.